Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Everybody please. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shishi Gaura Nitai ki jai, Shishi Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai, Jai Nitai Gaura Premanande, Hari 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 Bol.
Hare Krishna. Welcome to all of you to our Sunday program today. So nice to have all of you. So there's a lot of space if you want to move a little closer. Now we're gonna have a lecture. Gibt's jemand, der kein Englisch versteht? Everyone understands English, very Mataji. So we should have Russian translation. She will bring it to you. So today we are very fortunate to have with us His Holiness Bhakti Raghava Swami Maharaj. Let us welcome him by loudly chanting Hari Bol! So I would like to give a brief introduction to you, who we have speaking to us today. His Holiness Bhakti Raghava Swami Maharaj is a direct disciple of Srila Prabhupada. He's a sannyasi, which is a traveling preacher in the renounced order of life, who has dedicated his whole life to spreading spiritual knowledge, and he's also initiating guru in our society. And His Holiness Bhakti Raghava Swami today will speak about the science of Sva Dharma. He's very famous for speaking about this topic, which is an important aspect of our philosophy. Of course, we have the understanding we are a servant, the spirit soul, a servant of Krishna, but then we also have a material body and very different bodies. And so how do we engage that body in the service of Krishna? So he will enlighten us today. Thank you, Maharaj, for visiting.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
May I just add one feature, please? Maharaj has brought us some books from India. For those who would like to buy, who would like to take a book against a donation, Maharaj would be very happy to sign the books for you. Haribol.
First, you will make some advertisement, I guess, in your lecture, and then after we can present them again. I guess you will be inspired to learn more. And yeah, will you be selling them in the shop as well?
I'm not sure where they will be available. They'll be available here. We could put a few in the shop possibly later also.
It would be nice.
Yeah. And Manu can possibly handle that. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Govinda Jaya, Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopal Jaya 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 Jaya, Radha Ramana Hari, Govinda Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hari, Govinda Jaya Jaya, Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopal Jaya Jaya, Govinda Jaya Jaya, Gopal Jaya Jaya, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Bol, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Gauranithaya, 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 Jaya Gauranithaya. Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Jagannatha, Jaya Baladeva, Jaya Subhadra. Jaya Krishna Balaram, Jaya Krishna Balaram, Krishna Balaram, Jaya Krishna Balaram. Jaya Giri Govardhan, Giri Govardhan, Giri Govardhan, Jaya Giri Govardhan. Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radha. Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada. Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Pimanande Jayam Vishnupada Paramahamsa Pri Prajgachaja Stotra Satta Sri Simad His Divine Grace Srila Bhai Charanarvind Bhakti Raghava Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Skandi Biti Founder Acharyas Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Samaveta Bhakti Vrinda Ki Harinam Sankirtan Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jayanitai Gaura Pimanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru, to Sri Gauranga. All glories to Sri Prabhupada. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Taksuranmilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Everyone may kindly repeat the following short mantra or prayer. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Surabhyai Namaha. Om Surabhyai Namaha. Om Surabhyai Namaha. Mukham karoti vasalam pangum langayate girim yat kripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. Yat kripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone to our Sunday feast program. Anyone by chance coming for the first time to the temple? Okay. So a special welcome to those coming for the first time. Yeah. I first came for the first time to a Sunday feast program, believe it or not, exactly 50 years ago.
Whoa,
So a special day for me, or special summer, I suppose, yeah. It was in 1973, in the capital city of my country, Canada. I mean, yeah, thanks. My birthday present. Actually, coming to Krishna consciousness, it's always very interesting and very wonderful to hear how different devotees came to Krishna consciousness. I won't get into that as such, but being introduced to the whole philosophy and what we call Vedic culture, it's not only something new when we first come in contact with this culture, but it is, as our founder Acharya would often remind us and explain, it is meant to be always new, ever fresh, because we are dealing with something which is of a different nature than this material world. When we come in contact with the Vedic culture, we actually come in contact with an eternal culture. And that culture is based on a very profound science we call the science of Dharma. We use a lot of Sanskrit words, and definitely for those who are either newly coming or relatively new, it can be a little mind-boggling in the beginning. But Sanskrit, all of these words are in this very ancient language of Sanskrit, which is known as what we call the mother of all languages. And the Vedas deal with not only transcendental subject matters, but also deal with very extensive and detailed material subject matters. There are two main divisions that are found in the Vedic knowledge. One is called Shruti, and one is called Smriti. Shruti means what is heard, this original knowledge is heard from the original personality of Godhead in the Vedic literatures, we come to understand that not only there is the existence of God as an idea or as a philosophy or as a concept, but God is actually a person, and initially that might be not so easy to comprehend. So that original person, whom we call Krishna, actually reveals whenever there is creation, there are many creations, or creation comes again and again. And he reveals this spiritual transcendental knowledge that we call the Vedas. There's another section of the Vedas that we call spriti. We call spriti means to actually remember, and that is knowledge revealed by different saintly persons, and that knowledge has to do especially with what we need here in the material world, because we have this material body, we have this material energy that we every single day have to deal with. So in other words, there are two levels of the science of knowledge, or the science of Dharma, which for all of us who are here in the material world is important to know. Most of us, most of the people in this present age or period, or we could say in the 21st century especially, are rather disconnected with this original spiritual or transcendental knowledge, as well as being disconnected with the material knowledge. Of course, there's a lot of material knowledge. Science has made a lot of progress. We have made many discoveries in various fields of knowledge. However, it is actually said that there are more scientists, existing today than there has ever been recorded in history. And one would think that with all of this brain power, all of this intelligence, the world would be a better place than it is. And we know that we have many very complex and severe problems of a global nature, life-threatening problems. We're surrounded by unprecedented situations in the world today. And these are being talked about practically every day in the news and various reports, etc. The wonderful thing about the Vedic knowledge, especially when we begin to understand some of the basic concepts of what we call Dharma, helps us to see things more clearly, beginning with our own self. That very first Sunday that I attended, as we're attending now, a Sunday feast lecture, I remember the speaker, the devotee, quoting a verse I'd never heard before, which is in one of the important sections of the Vedas. And it's a verse that, of course, most devotees know, Atato Brahma Jigyasa, which means that actually now that we have attained this human body, this human form of life, now is the time actually to become inquisitive as to what it's all about. What is this world, who I am, where I come from, etc. I could immediately, of course, I think all of us can relate to this. important questions of life. And the wonderful thing is that, of course, in that very first lecture, I remember also being introduced to a portion of the Vedic literatures I had not heard about. I had already come in contact with the basic knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, although in 1973 it was still difficult to, in my hometown, to get a copy. But that book I'm referring to is known as the graduate study of Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita is giving us the preliminary and basic knowledge of spiritual life, the essence, we could say, of the Vedic knowledge. And the other book is referred to as the Srimad Bhagavatam, where there is more detailed information about this whole science of Dharma. I'd like to try and elaborate a little bit on this idea of Dharma. I can say that one of the foremost contributions of our founder Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, who established this movement, was to give us a very wonderful, clear and complete, I would say, understanding of that term Dharma. And Dharma is often translated as religion, which is based on one's belief or faith. But Srila Prabhupada would nicely explain that belief is something we can change. Somebody today is a Christian and becomes a Hindu the next day, or vice versa. Whereas Dharma is something that is unchangeable, because it's based on the eternal concept, the eternal understanding or concept of Dharma is what has to do with our original nature. Now we're sitting here, all of us are sitting here, we have to deal with two natures. The obvious nature is this body that we see every day in the mirror, and we have to interact every day with other bodies, other living entities. And there are human bodies, there are animal bodies, there are so many different types of bodies. The Vedic literatures speak about 8,400,000 species of life. But in addition to this body, there is consciousness, which is of a different nature than matter. Scientists are still struggling with this concept of consciousness. In the Vedic literatures, it's nicely explained how the source of consciousness is actually spiritual. The source of matter is also spiritual. And therefore, actual knowledge, real knowledge, complete knowledge, is to understand the nature of both matter and spirit. And to understand, it's one of the verses actually in the Bhagavad Gita, to understand the origin of both these levels of Dharma. On the spiritual level, just very briefly, we come to know, especially from the Bhagavad Gita, that all of us, all living entities, all life, the symptom of life is consciousness. If I have a stone, or like this piece of wood here, it's not conscious, it's just there. It won't move. It'll move if I push it. So matter is inert and without consciousness. But when there is life or consciousness, that means that there's presence of the soul. So for both matter and spirit, there is a specific science. The science is described as the science of spiritual Sva Dharma. Sva Dharma means original. So we speak of spiritual Sva Dharma on one side, and then we speak about material Sva Dharma. And because they are both connected with Dharma, and we are also connected with both of these realities, therefore it is in our interest to know and understand what is the complete science of these two levels of reality. In modern day society, there is, to a large extent, an absence of proper understanding of both levels. You know, modern day society has become very materialistic, and in general, less concerned about religion. This has been, we could say, an ongoing phenomenon for the last couple of hundred years, especially. And with the advent of, industrialization, we've become more focused on developing in a material way. Of course, we see all kinds of imbalances that have been created due to that. So Vedic knowledge is teaching us that both of these aspects of Dharma are very important to understand and necessary to learn how to balance these two levels of reality. So when we speak about spiritual Sva Dharma, naturally we speak about consciousness, and we speak about the source of that consciousness, which is the soul. We call Atma. In Sanskrit it's Jiva or Atma. And the Vedic knowledge is teaching us that we are actually that Atma as opposed to this body or this matter. Therefore Atma Gyan. Gyan is a Sanskrit word which means knowledge. Knowledge of the soul, Atma Gyan. Perfection of life is to actually fully understand and realize our identity as an eternal spirit soul, and know the different levels of consciousness which are meant to culminate in what we call Ananda Maya, different levels of understanding or consciousness. Ananda means happy. All of us are, seeking happiness, isn't it? By nature we want to be happy. So this knowledge of the soul is teaching us what is not only temporary happiness. All of us, we experience some type of happiness, but most of us, before we come to understand about the spiritual dimension of life, we only experience what is called material happiness. And material happiness is up and down, because generally, in addition to material happiness, we also experience material distress. And in modern day society, because of the way we're living, because of our lack of knowledge of spiritual dharma and lack of understanding of material dharma, we have created a situation where we experience more unhappiness. So spiritual Swadharma, it deals with the cultivation of the Atma or the soul, which is meant to culminate in understanding not only ourselves as a spirit soul, but the original soul or super soul or God, and knowing, understanding that we can only be happy if we establish a personal relationship with Krishna. Just like all of us in this world, everyone needs and is looking for relationship, isn't it? Most of the relationships, actually not most, all of the relationships in the material world have a beginning and an end, because at some point the person we love will not be there, will die, or we will die before that person. So the relationships in the material world for which we are seeking to experience happiness are temporary, and therefore not really fulfilling the way we are desiring. So spiritual Sva Dharma we call the science of the soul. And there are many literatures that deal with this subject matter that we as devotees are meant to study on a regular basis. In addition to this, spiritual Sva Dharma, there is material Sva Dharma, which I would say in modern day society is practically unknown. We have, I would say, deviated or distanced ourselves so much from what is meant to be the proper, more natural, more simple way of living, more simple way of interacting with one another, more simple way of working, even more simple way of educating ourselves, more natural way of making money or meeting our material necessities, that we have created a very complex, complicated world where all of us are tremendously under pressure and struggling in so many ways. Life is meant to be enjoyed. Life is meant to be, we hear that definition, our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, used to remind us. Devotee, someone who actually cultivates this knowledge, devotee is someone who is meant to be happy, which is our birthright. Our birthright actually is to be happy, because we are created as what is called Satchit Ananda. Krishna, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is described as Sat, which means eternal, Chit, full of knowledge, and Ananda, full of happiness. And we, being created by him, also have those same qualities. But we cannot experience that unless we know about these two levels of reality and unless we learn how to balance them. So today I just want to take a few minutes to maybe introduce this aspect of material Sva Dharma, because it's practically totally lacking in modern day society. So material Sva Dharma is very much connected with what the Vedic culture advocates or promotes as being the more simple and natural way to live. The more natural way in which we can be healthy in terms of this body, both biologically as well as emotionally or mentally. Bhagavad Gita teaches us our constitution in terms of this body. This body has a gross aspect, what we call the gross material body, and then we have another body inside this body which is called the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and ego. And beyond that, of course, is a third body that we have, which is unknown to most people, is the spiritual body, the spiritual entity whom we are. So in the Vedic culture, Vedic knowledge teaches us 4 very basic fundamental sciences. To a large extent are unknown in modern society, and therefore it's one of the aspects that we are, as a society, endeavoring to introduce in our different centers. I'll just mention those very briefly and maybe comment on a few of them. which hopefully can give some little insight as to the material aspect of Dharma and how we can balance both. In other words, the more we can understand the spiritual, the material aspect of Dharma, the more we can understand how nature works and how we are meant to interact with nature, beginning with our own material body, and then other entities and material nature in itself. The more we are able to successfully do this, the more we will more easily advance in terms of our spiritual Sva Dharma. In other words, there's a direct link and connection between how we live materially, how we acquire knowledge we acquire, what activities we perform, where we live, what kind of education we receive, etc. And how we can evolve more easily on the higher level, spiritual level. So naturally, when both are absent, then things cannot function properly. And again, this is to a large extent the situation in modern day society. We're lacking spiritual knowledge, and we're also lacking material knowledge. So these four sciences have traditionally been the standard knowledge given in traditional education. We call Vedic education, Vedic lifestyle. And it begins with what is called in Sanskrit anvikshiki. Anvikshiki means actually the science of philosophy. To understand even material things, we need to have some basic understanding of philosophy. That philosophy is broken down into three, which again is, the first one is Sankhya. Sankhya, Yoga, and Tarka. So this knowledge actually is very, very detailed, and normally it takes many years in the traditional educational system called Gurukula. Gurukula. Guru means master or teacher, and Kula means that place or home where one stays to learn that knowledge, to acquire that knowledge. So Anvikshiki is the beginning. Within that science of Anvikshiki, it deals with especially philosophy, psychology, and sociology, which are all subject matters that are covered actually in the Bhagavad Gita. It explains about our especially spiritual nature. It deals with what is known today as metaphysics, above what is above matter. Once we have a basic knowledge of this science of philosophy, then we can begin to take up any of the other three sciences depending on our nature. According to nature, we will be more inclined towards one particular science. But all of these four is what helps to make up a more ideal society. So the second science actually is called Trayi. Trayi means the science of education. It is a science that traditionally those who are teachers in society are referred to as brahmanas. And within that system of education, there are what is called Chaturdasa Vidya. Chaturdasa Vidya means 14 standard books of knowledge. I spoke about Chatur Vidya. Chatur means four, Vidya means knowledge or science. Chaturdasa Vidya, Dasa means 10. 10 plus 4, 14 books of knowledge, beginning with the four Vedas, and then it goes into Puranas and other Vedic literatures. That is the science of education. And those who are teachers, teachers are very important in any society because they're the ones who have the proper knowledge. They have both spiritual knowledge as well as material knowledge, isn't it? The third science is called Danda Niti. Danda Niti, which is the science of politics, because any society requires that there be leaders to direct and govern and organize society, isn't it? So leaders, just like today, all over the world, we have governments, we have leaders, and they are enacting different policies and governing their particular country, etc. So that's a whole very involved, detailed science of which so much of literatures are there. And those, to become a leader, let's say a Vedic, we call a Vedic leader. The Vedic leader is known as Raja Rishi, combined, Rajarshi. Therefore, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaks about, he speaks to Arjuna, who is actually a leader, a king. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarsayu vidu. Rajarshi. Raja means qualified materially as a leader, and also rishi. Rishi means saintly person, having transcendental knowledge. One cannot be actually a leader in society unless these two qualifications, basic qualifications, are there, that one be qualified materially and also qualified spiritually. So that is the third science, Danda Niti. The fourth is called Varta. Varta means the science of economics, because we need everyone, especially those who are householders, they need to make a living. The science of economics, however, in the Vedic culture is very nicely defined and very different than modern day economy. Every country in the world is promoting, isn't it, economic development, and there is so much such development. Unfortunately, it is not based on what is meant or what is defined in the Vedic culture. Vedic culture defines economy, sustainable economy, as in the Bhagavad Gita, as being Krishi Goraksha Vanijam. Krishi actually means agriculture, and Goraksha means cow protection. And Vanijam means trade based on production of agriculture or cow products. Agriculture is very interesting, how the those who started or established the United States, the forefathers, not the forefathers, what do you call them? The founders of America, like Benjamin Franklin and others. There is some interesting statement made by them whereby America will only remain strong and prosperous if agriculture is kept in the forefront. In other words, way back a few hundred years ago, it was understood by even the founding fathers of America. Agriculture has always been, to a large extent, it's described as the noblest profession. And if we analyze agriculture as it is meant to be practiced, that is the best investment one can find, because by one seed one can have so much of production. Is that one seed you can, from one coconut, you can grow one tree that will, coconut trees can live up to 100 years. And so you can just imagine how many coconuts you'll get. And then each coconut like that. I mean, we used to have so much of biodiversity in the world today, unfortunately, because of having taken practices which are not in keeping with what is recommended in these Vedic literatures. We have changed or disrupted what is meant to be the natural system for living, for growing our food. So these four sciences are not known, actually, practically speaking, outside of India, and even within India, they're not being practiced as well. So the point being that we are all, ultimately, all of us are searching for the same thing. We're searching for love, for happiness. We are created to experience love, to experience happiness. And unless we cultivate these two levels of knowledge, or these two aspects of Dharma, then we will not understand how to actually achieve that goal. So in other words, Krishna consciousness, this philosophy that we call Krishna consciousness, or Vedic culture, Vedic teachings, is giving us the information needed so that we can meet, understand, and experience our spiritual self, or spiritual reality, which ultimately is meant to bring us in establishing an eternal, spiritual means eternal relationship with Krishna. And on the one level, and on the other side, which also helps us to deal with this material world in which we're living, the natural resources that are given. We have been given, humanity has been given, what is called 3 essential gifts of nature that, if properly cared for, properly protected, can help us to meet all of our necessities of life, both spiritual as well as material. And these are described in the Vedic literatures also, these 3 gifts of nature, which every single one of us should at least try to begin to understand. And they are unfortunately not known in modern day society, and you'll immediately understand as I just present them briefly. The first gift of nature, which we are, for the majority of us who are living in cities, definitely, we're totally disconnected with, and we have no idea of why it is even called a gift of nature, and what does that mean exactly. The first gift of nature described in these ancient texts are cows. And we know how not only cows, but we are a very destructive society. We are destroying, we are killing so many animals, isn't it? We're killing nature, we're destroying our forests. We're billions of animals every year unnecessarily are being killed. And the Vedic literatures describe how, of all the animals, cows are especially important. That's a whole subject matter in itself, of course. So the first gift of nature are cows. The second gift of nature, which is meant to go hand in hand with cows, actually is land. Land. Because from land we get all of our, we are meant to get all of our necessities of life. Most of us who are sitting in this room today, in the temple, are probably wearing cloth which is not natural, isn't it? Because the whole textile industry has developed in such a way that that our cloth is not as it is meant to be. So from the land we get cloth, either cotton or from animals, like from cotton, sheep and whatnot. So land is providing us with cloth. Land is, of course, providing us with food. And land is providing us with shelter, buildings, and land is providing us with medicines. If we know how to properly utilize these natural resources, we can meet all of these basic necessities that we have. So that is the second gift of nature. The first being cows, second being land, and the third is knowledge. Knowledge, both spiritual knowledge as well as material knowledge. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is that we as a human species, we have that ability, we have that developed consciousness to understand things, to cultivate knowledge, especially to cultivate transcendental knowledge, spiritual knowledge, and for which these ancient literatures are providing us that opportunity. So devotees in Krishna consciousness have this very, I would say, important responsibility, very grave responsibility to themselves, of course, cultivate this knowledge, and also to make that available to as many people as possible. Our whole modern day society has actually deviated from these basic sciences that I spoke to a little earlier. If we understand that the science, the ideal economy, which is meant to be most sustainable, is connected with agriculture and cows, then we can understand what is taking place in the world is totally disconnected with that. Education is another major topic. I don't think we have time to elaborate on this as well, but there's a very unique and specific, we speak about a formal education and non-formal education as being the two main systems of education that are presented or discussed in the Vedic, let's say, culture. So some of these books, as mentioned a little earlier, do speak. For example, this book here is called Traditional Education. So education, from the Vedic point of view, must absolutely deal with and touch upon these two levels of knowledge, material knowledge as well as spiritual knowledge. And it should be knowledge, actual knowledge is knowledge that doesn't change. When we begin to read Bhagavad Gita, we can begin to accept or understand rather. There are many subject matters, of course, and we can only, in the relatively short time that we have on a Sunday, deal with only so much. And I think what is also good is to leave a little bit of time, because we have much less time now, for any possible questions or comments that might be there. So maybe we can take a few minutes if anyone has some thoughts or realizations. How many have read Bhagavad Gita? Okay, very good. Yeah. Bhagavad Gita, I was in Indonesia maybe a month back or so, and Indonesia, as you may know, is a predominantly Muslim country. Actually, it's the largest Muslim country in the world. And one of our devotees was mentioning how he knows a particular professor who's from a Muslim background, who is having a website and is teaching Bhagavad Gita online. I was surprised. Because he has understood what, you know, all of us should understand. Bhagavad Gita is not just like a Hindu book. Krishna is not simply a Hindu god. Bhagavad Gita is a book of knowledge. Actually, all of the Vedic literatures speak about knowledge which, regardless of the religion or denomination we belong to, is meant to help all of us deal with life, the realities of life. And again, on these two levels of material world and spiritual world. We are living now in what we call the material world, but our destination is, if we look behind us, that nice photo is there. When we go back to the spiritual world, Krishna is waiting for all of us. Our real home, it's like, you know, sometimes we travel and we go away from our country or home. And then the longer we're away from home, it always feels nice to come back home. We've been away from our real home, we cannot imagine, since a very long time. We are not actually meant to remain here in this temporary world. And if we are not cultivating this knowledge, if we don't learn how to resolve the real problems of life, which are basically four, as explained in the Bhagavad Gita, the problems of old age, of disease, death, and then rebirth, so birth, death, old age, and disease, then we remain in this unending cycle, which the main factor being suffering. In material world is referred to as Mrityu Loka. Loka means place, and Mrityu means death, place of death. No one can avoid death or disease like that. But there is a way, there is a system, by cultivating this knowledge, by which we can put a permanent end, by which we can bring a permanent solution to these actual problems of life. And that's all nicely explained in these literatures. So if there's any comment or question, we'll be happy to address. There's a mic here. You can, yeah, in the back row.
So in modern society we have all this knowledge also. You have mentioned like sociology and psychology and whatever.
Yes.
And we do also farming, and we also live from the land. So
what's the difference? Okay. We have sociology. Modern day sociology is based on actually it's formulated that way. Modern day sociology, we call Western sociology, is very different from Vedic sociology. I'll explain this very briefly. Modern day sociology, which is only in existence as a science since the last few hundred years, is based on what we can perceive with our material senses. And what we can understand with our limited temporary mind and intelligence. And that is described in the Vedic literatures as pratyaksha and anumana. Pratyaksha means what we can see with our eyes, what we can touch, like that. Whereas in the Vedic sociology goes beyond that and accepts the domain or the level beyond what we can see or understand, and accepts the transcendental realm. You mentioned about, yes, we're doing agriculture everywhere, but what kind of agriculture are we doing? We're not doing natural agriculture. Vedic agriculture is very different than modern agriculture. Modern agriculture is what we call agro-business, isn't it? The term is quite common. And as a result of our unnatural way of doing agriculture, of growing food, well, we have one of the global problems today is called the problem of desertification. Maybe close to 70% of our topsoil today has degenerated and cannot produce proper food. More and more of our land in different countries is becoming desert-like. You take an apple today, or any produce, any vegetable, the level of nutrients that was there in an apple, let's say 50 years ago, it has gone down by 40% or 80%, whatever, it varies. You can verify scientifically that the quality of our soil has diminished immensely. The biodiversity has also been reduced. So the quality of our food, the quality of our land, and we depend on food, we depend on land. When food and land becomes with less nutrients, then that affects our body. We are living in a situation today, yes, we're doing agriculture, but we're doing it by exploiting Mother Nature. We're doing agriculture using all kinds of machineries which are actually destroying the land, as opposed to what is meant to be the more natural system of rejuvenating the land. There's a whole science to agriculture, there's a whole science to taking care of animals, etc., which is not being followed, which is unknown to a large extent in modern day society. And therefore, we have severe life-threatening problems in the world today, in terms of health, in terms of ecology as well. We have, I think in America, in the US, maybe less than 40% of the forests exist today. So we've created, due to our lack of proper basic understanding, we have in the last 20 years used up over 30% of the natural resources on the planet. And the problem is that we have only one planet, and if we continue in this way, it's going to cause further disruption.